Hey Sasha, how's it going?
It's going well. So we have Calvin Lunt on today, and I'm really excited to share this conversation with everyone. It was amazing.
Yeah, Calvin was the classically feminine boy, grew up to be gay, beautiful, beautiful man, and
Yeah.
a dancer, became a drag queen, and it feels like only this era could produce a trans woman out of Calvin's life. It feels to me,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. In some ways, he's kind of got some aspects of the classic HSTS, but he wasn't really gender dysphoric as a child. So, as you'll hear, he had a kind of chaotic upbringing. And as he
Okay.
started to discover his sexuality, some events in his life created a lot of shame around that. And so, as you'll hear, Calvin kind of did this pendulum swing from like one extreme type of identity to another. He had a complicated relationship with his sexuality. He was a mixed race kid in a working class family. And, he went from one kind of presentation to another. And it's interesting, Calvin also talks about how being a social media influencer with a significant following and having the cameras on him, how that
Yeah.
impacted his sense of identity. And he was also very involved in like heavily drinking and drugs and stuff like that in the gay party scene. And so he has a lot of different factors that impacted his sense of searching for identity. I think the important timeline pieces for our listeners is that at 25, he started transition. And this kind of came out of the blue. He's a funny story about how he told his mom. And then at 27, just 2 years later, he started to detransition. And part of that was sobriety and kind of realizing that there were some aspects of his identity which he was living a lie, as he says. So with that, Calvin is also currently working in the capacity of like a wellness coach, and his training comes from spiritual practitioners he's encountered in different parts of the world and from his own kind of recovery and healing journey. So with that said, I think we will introduce you to Calvin Lunt.
Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we probe the gender landscape within contemporary culture.
And we consider the implications of prioritizing personal identity over other aspects of the self.
This is the thinking person's take on gender.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens. Hi, Calvin. Nice to see you.
Hi guys, thank you for having me.
Hello.
Hi.
It's good to
We're-
have you here.
Yes, we're really thrilled. We've been trying to get you on the podcast for some time, so it's nice to be here. You have a really interesting story, and I think later on we'll get into kind of your childhood and like how you kind of came to this long, windy journey. But I wanted to start with kind of where you are now, because you've gone through such an evolution in terms of your search for self, your healing from all kinds of experiences, and you feel like you've really landed on a much healthier place. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about like, how did you get yourself out of all of the gender confusion and into a space where you are now?
It was a very simple process, but a very simple process for a very complicated person, which I was. I liked to overcomplicate things, and the simplicity of stepping away from society, stepping away from the noise, and really tapping back into myself, really understanding what those core conditions were that were placed upon me, how society, has changed its roles of gender and sexuality, and how this constant change is forever, changing us as people. Now, just to say it super simply, I sat in front of a mirror for 6 months naked and looked at every single aspect of my body and looked at every part of my body. And when I was able to realize that my thinking was so warped and my thinking was the thinking of so many other people around me and not of my own, that I was able to tap into my feelings more than anything. I was a child that was never really ever allowed to feel. I was a person that was never really able to express myself fully in the ways that I wanted to, and to know what emotions were healthily. Now, I had to learn all of those at the age of 27. You know, I was a 27-year-old person, not knowing where I was, who I was, without any structure in my life. And I had to find that structure. Now, my journey was I got sober. You know, I kind of addressed a lot of the partying that I was doing in the gay scene. The kind of I noticed this normalization that we had of, you know, taking drugs and partying till late and dancing in the clubs, and we actually thought that it was a place of liberation, and actually it was a place of escapism, and we were all just in this nightclub dancing our gay shame away, thinking it was super normal. And I was able to notice that and to see that, you know, at such a young age. And from that moment, you know, and actually it was 7 years ago to this day, on the 30th of June 2016, when I actually said enough is enough. You know, I kind of want to go a little bit deeper and understand what is actually going on for me. Yeah.
Wow. So this marks an important day, the day that we're recording this. That's interesting. Was there a precipitating event that caused you to say enough is enough?
At first, you know, I believed every problem that was happening to me was to do with my drinking. My drinking escalated at a point in my life, and I was, you know, just coming onto a year of estrogen and, you know, hormone replacement, testosterone blockers. I was medicating. I was seen as, you know, this beautiful woman in society. I had everything that I felt like I needed in order to be happy, but things just weren't aligning. And, you know, my drinking had escalated at this point, and I had kind of looked at my consumption of alcohol and drugs and kind of thought, you know, it's quite normal. But this one day I tested myself. You know, I went to a fashion show in Liverpool. I cycled there. I took £5 with me because I said to myself, I'll take £5, I'll be able to have one glass of wine, and I will cycle back home. Now, I managed to get to this fashion show. I managed to drink 2 bottles of wine, half a bottle of vodka with a few other people. I managed to get cocaine, and I managed to come home with probably about £15 in my pocket. And I realized I made money. I was a hustler. And I realized that I made this promise to myself that I was not going to drink, and I actually drank more than I ever did. And the next day I woke up and I said, I'm going to make a change. And, you know, I got sober that next day. And during my sobriety, you know, I was living in a women's refuge. I was living in a safe house with 3 other women. I was attending 12-step programs, and I was in a treatment center. Now, I was in this treatment center to address my alcoholism. That's what I was there for.
As a trans woman?
As a trans woman, yes.
Okay, keep going, yeah.
So I went in as Cal, and people knew me as Cal, and I was coming into 3 months of sobriety, and this one day I was sat in a meeting, and I just said, this is all a lie. You know, I have lived my whole life wearing masks, and this was the biggest mask. My transition was the biggest mask I ever held, because my whole entire life, my whole entire adult life, let's say, was a mission to destroy Calvin. If that was through alcohol, whether that was through drugs, whether that was through allowing people to use my body, like I was just destructive towards myself. And when I realized, actually, I'm doing the exact same thing, I'm still killing myself, and I'm doing that in a capacity that is so normal and is so palatable to the world around me, and I'm actually being congratulated for it. And, you know, I left that meeting that day, and my whole world was just like, I don't know, I felt like so much weight was lifted off my shoulders. but I didn't know what to do with it.
Whoa. You remind me of so many people I knew in their 20s where they were running away from themselves in this kind of under the banner of we're having fun. And they couldn't run fast enough, and it's slightly hysterical, and it's very heightened. And honestly, there's some great fun to be had in the midst of it all. But there's an awful lot of people escaping themselves and trying on different identities. Now, obviously, back in my day, it wasn't a trans identity, but trying to be someone they weren't. And I do think sobriety often brings people to a kind of a yielding to themselves of this is who you are. Just, yeah.
It allows you to meet yourself, even though you don't want to meet yourself, because that's the whole purpose of drinking and taking drugs and the running. You just don't want to meet you.
So when you met you, for maybe the first time in a long time, what were the parts of you that you had been so ashamed of? And then what were the parts of you that you were like, oh, this is actually a lovely part? Because I can imagine when you suppress yourself in that way, you're not only blocking off the parts of yourself you don't like, but you're not able to connect with good aspects too. So what were you discovering when you started to connect with yourself?
I discovered how much of a gentle person I was and how sensitive I was to the world around me. I think there's this, I come from a very working class Liverpool background. Men don't cry. This is the kind of place that I grew up in. Now if you come to the south of England and you're upper class, then it's you see a lot of kind of femininity, and it's really weird living in London that I see a lot of men, and I'm like, wait, they're straight. Like, yeah, they're straight, and they're very feminine. But where I came from, I think my femininity was not allowed to be. It was me and my brother. We've had these conversations before, which have been very, very, intrusive, and like also confronting, like how we feel we could be around a friend's child, for example. If we seen someone who had a baby, we'd just go, yeah, cute baby, cute baby, yeah, nice. But when I was, a woman, oh my God, she's beautiful. I'd be able to pick the baby up and I'd connect with the baby, and I'd able to show a sense of love to that baby, and I could do that as a woman. I felt like I could tap into that part of me. But as a man, it's weird. It's quite creepy. Like if a man is acting like that around a kid, it's a bit creepy. So there's this sense of, I don't even know what the word to use is, but it's ingrained into my brain that it's wrong. It's wrong to connect on that level. It's wrong to connect with emotions on such a level. Now, the kind of life that I grew up in, we got kisses and I love yous on birthdays and Christmases. That was all. We didn't get any other type of affection. So we were never really shown what that was. So we had no concept of what positive love was, or healthy love or healthy support. We never really knew what that was. So when I detransitioned, I was able to understand this sense of feminine and masculine, and not from the sense of what we're taught, in the world around us, that, being feminine is, long hair and nice nails and all of that. Like there's a deeper level of what femininity is. It's the care, and it's the holding of things together, and it's the creator. And then the masculine is the structure, is the go-getter, is the worker. So it was like, okay, how do I piece them together rather than it being what society is telling me it is? And I was able to find balance in myself. Now, I'll be super honest with you. I think since my detransition, my kind of energy has gone, woof, it's whacked to like super masculine to an extent, where I can be quite hard in this world, and I find it quite difficult to soften up. Like that for me is still a work in progress, like where I have to learn how to tap back into the feminine and be a loving partner, and be loving to my boyfriend and be loving to my mum, and you know, not come from that place of normal, of which I know is, you know, is the reactor, is the harshness. You know, I've got to learn how to lean into that.
And you came from like where a world where like men were men and women were women. It was very old fashioned in a way, very kind of stereotypical as far as I can see. A lot of love, a lot of alcohol as well, and a kind of a message of alcohol is fun. And you would have been a natural funster. You were always going to be the one who was, it seems that was in you. Like your brother, you were saying, was upstairs like tapping on the thing, telling them all to keep quiet, when you were like, let me down to join my mammy and her friends. That really stuck in my mind as, isn't it funny, two siblings can have such different responses. And you really did. You were like a little boy, like, let me at it. And you didn't stop. That kind of maintained, really.
It did. This level of, you know, of partying, you know, addiction runs in our family. You know, my grandmother died of alcoholism. My grandmother's sister is, you know, like 45, 47 years sober. So it's always, you know, I've noticed now, like during the trial and the research, you know, the addiction in the family. And my brother is very much like against it. Like he's, you know, he doesn't drink. He's kind of very like, you know, anti-drinking. He hates my mum when she drinks, and it's very much like that. But for me, I was that kid in a candy shop. You know, I'd pretend I was dancing around with, you know, the can of cider as, you know, the 5-year-old, and you know, people were clapping for me, and you know, it was that environment that I was in. You know, I think I was like 7, and you know, I think my stepdad or someone gave me a cigarette, like to say, you know, try it, and you know, we tried it and we choked on it, and you know, so I was very much surrounded with that, and I was so attracted, you know, to this sense of partying and what it looked like. And I think it's really important to touch on, I was the shy kid though at times. I think I've always had that sense of anxiety, and I've always had this sense of not fully feeling like I fit in. So when we would go to, you know, either family functions or like parties, you know, I remember my mum would give us a shandy. Now, if anyone doesn't know what a shandy is, it's half a lager and lemonade. So, you know, all the kids had it back then. You know, I mean, if they'd done it nowadays, then and social services would be straight there. But back in the day, you know, it was the mums would, you know, have a little shandy, and it would perk me up, and I would be able to dance on the dance floor with the other kids. And I mean, I was like 8 or 9, you know, I was young, you know, I was a young kid, but that for me was okay. I think that was the beginning in my mind of that escapism and of that connecting, like this, I need something to connect.
And you were also taught it, just to jump in, you were taught it really from the beginning, because your mother was going out, that was the fun time, she worked very hard, it was quite a, you know, difficult life, but there was fun. And that was Saturday night, like you said, that song Saturday Night, and I remember it. And, you know, that was the fun. So you were kind of, it was very much just, it was taught to you. This is the fun part of life. And, you know, you were receptive to it. And I want to come back to that in a few minutes, but you go ahead, Sasha, because it looks like you have something.
Yeah. You know, we're referring, by the way, to Calvin's new podcast, where he kind of talks about, episode 1 is about hitting rock bottom, and episode 2 is about the childhood. And one thing that really stood out, it's really great. We'll include it in the notes. But one thing that stood out to me is you, at one point you say, you know, I wasn't just dancing a little, I was dancing until sweat was dripping off my body as a kid. Yeah. And I want to just talk about, there's so many things here. I'm thinking about dance as this natural thing that some people are drawn to, and coming from the dance world, I know so many gay men who are so beyond exceptional in dance, and it's so trained but also so organic and natural. And it brings up this question for me, which we hear a lot about in certain circles, about kids who dance and kids in drag and the drag world. And I think this is really an important topic because it can get either too glorified on one side as though there's no harm done whatsoever, but the other side also, I think, misunderstands the performance aspect. And like, at what age do young people get drawn to performance? And is that something imposed on them by their parents, or is that natural? And what is age appropriate for a kid who just is passionate about dance? Like, so can you just talk a little bit about your experience with dance and performance, because that obviously played a role for you, probably in positive and negative ways, in terms of like wearing a mask, right? So,
I'm glad. No, it's great, because I'm glad that you brought that up, because I've never actually been asked that question before. And you know, I always, like, from the moment I walked, I danced. You know, it was in my body to dance. I was obsessed with Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson. Like, I would copy everything. Like, I would create a stage, you know, I would get the kids from the streets and I'd make them all sit on the step and they'd watch me perform. And, you know, I was very much the performer and I loved to dance. Now, obviously, my mum comes from, you know, the kind of some of the rave scene in the 90s. And, you know, Liverpool was very much known for its club scene and the rave scene back then. And, you know, I heard a lot of that music and, you know, I'd see videos that she'd, you know, bring back from the nightclubs on the VHS. And I'd watch people dancing and sweating in the clubs. And, you know, I used to pretend I was there. And, you know, we'd have like parties sometimes in the house. And, you know, it sometimes turned into, you know, a bit of kind of the radio would be turned on and it'd be club music. And I would just like be dancing and, you know, I'd have a whistle with a rave. Now that part for me was just, I think it was just letting loose and letting go. Now, as a performative side of things, you know, I was very much the kid that loved the Spice Girls and Steps. And, you know, I very much thought I was, you know, one of the pop stars. And I remember once watching, this is going to sound quite cringe, I remember once watching the Backstreet Boys on the TV and just sitting there crying as I watched them and like being, I want to be them. I just want to be a pop star, you know, but God help me, I couldn't sing.
What sort of age were you? Were you a teenager?
No, I was definitely like around like 6, like, you know, around 6 at the age of 6. But, you know, I touched on this story in my podcast, which was, there was a moment when, you know, my stepdad moved in when I was around the age of 6. You know, we'd never really had a man in the house because my dad left at a young age. So my mum really kind of allowed me to do whatever I wanted to do within reason, you know. If I wanted to put on her Madonna comb bra and run up and down the street, she'd let me do it. You know, it was very fun. And, you know, we joke about it now that my mum says, you know, I was the first one that put you in drag. But she just allowed me to do it with such innocence, and it was never with a label or with anything behind it. It was just a child playing dress up, you know?
Yeah.
And then my stepdad moved in, and I'd never been around such a masculine energy before. And, you know, we were at one of these parties one night and I was dancing in the living room and I was just dancing away and I was enjoying myself, just being this free child, just carefree about the world. And I remember he began to laugh. And, like, this was my first ever feeling of shame. And, you know, when I've done the work that I've done on myself, I've had to really go back into my life and go, where was the first moments of shame? And I believe that this was one of the first moments of shame for me, that they laughed at me and I didn't understand why they were laughing. And then, you know, the boys joined in, and then, you know, they began to get a little bit older then, so they can kind of notice what's a bit girly or what's a bit feminine or what's a bit gay, you know, so they kind of started to catch up onto that. You know, I remember in that moment, I just carried on. You know, my mum's famous words were always, just ignore them, just ignore them. I don't think she knew how to hold it, but also throughout my whole life, you know, I have so much love for my mum. And she's always felt like the in-between. Like, she just, you know, she always feels like she's doing wrong, or she, you know, she just doesn't know where she's at. And I get that, you know, as an adult. I understand that, because you have a partner that you love and you have a child that you love and you just can't please everyone. And from that moment, my dancing became very secretive. I stopped dancing. I would lock the bedroom door and I'd put music on and I'd listen and I'd hear footsteps and I'd hide it away. So I stopped, I kind of stopped dancing, and I only began to train as a dancer at the age of 15. Now, this is something that I've not fully expressed and shared, and I think it's important that I do share because it's a part of, where my life kind of took a U-turn, I believe. Now, I wasn't the most academic in school. I was not able to learn in school. I think my energy was focused on just surviving in school and just kind of getting through and keeping my head down. So I didn't have the capacity to learn. So I was taken out of school and I was put into a program on a Friday where I would go to a dance school. And, that would be part of my education. Now, the dance teacher, so I entered this dance school at the age of 15, and I believe the dance teacher at the time was probably around 32, 33. And I always remember, seeing this glare in his eyes of I don't know what that glare was, but, it was quite flirtatious, I'd say. And, I'm this young 15-year-old kid that's kind of realizing that he's gay and, this is a good-looking guy, and So I carried on dancing at this place, and then my dancing progressed, and I got better at what I'd done, and then I joined the company. I got an offer to join the company, and as time went on, this guy, I call it grooming, to be honest with you. This guy began to take advantage of his power that he had. He kissed me at times. There was times when we had done shows and we drank, and I was in blackouts, and I'd wake up the next morning being with this person and not knowing what had happened. I'm 17 at this age now, so I am of legal age, but
and what sort of age was he?
At this point now, I'm guessing he was around about 30, 34. So to me, it was very kind of you have this person that's really above you, and, he's kind of your boss. So you kind of feel like this is what you have to do, and you go along with it. And around the age of 18, I kind of said enough was enough. I was just like, this person has a partner. I'm noticing now that he's doing it with other guys that are now joining the company. I'm not the only one. And that's when I began to find the nightclubs, and I began to find, the gay clubs, and I began dancing in the gay clubs, and then it became drag after that. And something that I will pick up on, because I speak about it in the podcast, which was an identity that I took on, which was this kind of ghetto kid, this kind of American basketball player. I brought that into my dance. So my dancing at the time was very kind of masculine, very hip hop based. The girls fancied me, whenever I danced. Girls were really attracted to me because they thought I was straight when I was dancing. Dance allowed me to tap back into my femininity, and when I danced feminine, I always remember being told not to do that. You're never going to get hired. You're never going to get hired dancing the way that you do. It's not attractive. It doesn't look good. What are you doing? And it was this sense of okay, so there definitely is something wrong with me. And because you told me that what I'm doing is wrong, then I'm going to take it even further and put it on a wig and put on heels and do everything else that you're telling me that is wrong. And I'm going to show you exactly what I can do, and that's how I progressed into my femininity, by becoming a drag performer.
Okay, can I ask? Well, there's a lot of things. It's almost like you have this pendulum swinging where moments you're embracing femininity, then you go the opposite direction, then someone pushes you back. And it's like this constant, it feels like such a confusing experience, first of all. I mean, that's interesting. And just who the heck told you that's the worst advice I've ever heard for a professional dancer? Have they never seen Janet Jackson on tour? Or what are they talking about? That's every single successful dancer almost invariably has a lot of beauty and femininity in the way they
Yeah.
dance. So that's insane advice. Who's the crazy person who said that to you?
And did you have male dancing you and female dancing you? Like, was there two different versions?
There was, and I think, you know, maybe Sasha, you can relate to this, because I think as a dancer, you know, you're just basically a vessel for that choreography. You know, whatever you're told to do, you can tap into it. And I think, you know, dancing allowed me to express my anger, express my love. So it allowed me to express whatever emotions that were happening to me in that moment. And, you know, I was very good at listening to other people and being told kind of what to do and how to be, you know, because everyone was telling me how to be. So it was like, okay, this is how I dance in this role. But, you know, when I put on the wig and, you know, when I kind of stepped into the drag side of things, it was like a complete different person. It was like a complete different persona in how I walked, how I moved, how I spoke. There was like a full switch.
It's funny you say that, because I was thinking a little bit about, in my experience with dance, when you are in a class or in a troupe and someone teaches you a choreography, you really are a vessel. But then solo performance, which is like my preference, you are inventing it yourself. You're letting the music speak to you. You're not following any pre-written choreography. So I find that drag probably has similar elements. It's an improvisational to some degree. It's a solo performance. The spotlight is on you. So what was it like when you started to do drag? Because you said this was a very different world. So talk more about that.
Drag was like the first mask that I put on. You know, I think dealing with a lot of shame of my sexuality more than anything. You know, I'd recently came out to my mum, and, you know, her response to my coming out was, just don't be sleeping with anyone. Do what you want, but just don't be sleeping around. So there was a moment of me feeling like, okay, it definitely is wrong. You know, my sexuality is wrong. Now, doing drag allowed me to be as gay and to be as loud as I possibly could through this mask. And, you know, that was also fueled with a whole cocktail of drugs as well.
Yeah.
You know, I had never ever done drag sober. I'd never put on a wig sober.
It often feels to me that the drag scene in general is fueled by a cocktail of drugs and drink. It feels very drinky, druggy.
Yeah, it is, you know, and I think I've always said, and the reason why I don't do drag anymore is because I've always said that it's a place where you get to learn yourself and learn to express yourself. And once it's done, you know. But nowadays, kids just do drag because they, you know, aren't that great at dancing. So they want to, you know, get on a stage and perform in a wig, or they're really good at doing makeup. So, you know, now that I can do a smoky eye and put on an eyelash, I'm going to become a drag queen because it's trendy and it's, you know, it's super cool.
So much easier,
you know, so
than being a real dancer.
Yeah, of course, you know, like
you two bitches. But you're right. I never thought of it as a non-dancer. I'd never thought of it. I get it, because to be a really good dancer without being a drag artist, you'd want to be shit hot, like to be. Yeah. I just realised that. Yeah, that's so funny.
Can you death drop? Sorry, I just have to ask. Can you death drop?
I would rather throw myself in front of a tube than even try to death drop. I'll be honest with you.
Like, what's death drop? What's death drop?
Where they throw a leg up in the air and like completely just drop down to the floor. Like that's going to give people bad backs.
It looks like you
I already spent a
dropped
lot on chiropractor.
Yeah, it looks like you were dropped out of an airplane and you like landed in this weird position, but like people will spin and then drop into this crazy position. We'll have to throw a YouTube video in it.
Can you death drop, Sasha?
No, that's not part of our dance form at all.
No.
I never. Okay, so I mean, in a serious note, I think what you're saying is that in a way you were able to kind of concentrate your sense of femininity, but in this exaggerated way that was also fueled by a lot of drugs and alcohol. So this is not necessarily a healthy self-expression, but it was like a powerful taste of like everything you'd repressed. And then you said once you're done with it, you're done with it. So Like, at what point did you leave drag, and then what happened next?
Well, I started drag at the age of 18, and my drag career, it took off, and, I was, the most beautiful in Liverpool. But, well, that's not the most beautiful. I had the most nicest teeth out of drag queens. Like, drag queens,
Oh, you're very beautiful, Calvin.
Didn't have really good teeth back then. But, so it was around the age of 24, I was on a reality TV show on MTV, and they really kind of like harnessed in on my drag at the time. I loved performing. I loved who I was, but then when I got onto the show, they wanted me to get in drag at certain times, and they wanted me to do this and they wanted me to do that, and I just kind of began to fall out of love with it. But actually, when I look back on it, it's not that I was falling out of love with it. I just didn't have a line of cocaine to go with it, because I'd never done drag sober before. So it was very uncomfortable that they were wanting me to go on like these, on these jobs and do makeup at these places and put me into these situations to do drag. And I had no vice to take it with me. And it was, it was very uncomfortable, and that's when I believed I had fell out of love with drag. So,
but maybe you just couldn't really do drag sober.
No, I couldn't. I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to be feminine or to allow myself to be gay without being drunk. Anything to do with being. Go ahead, Sasha.
This reminds me a little bit of like sometimes I've heard women who are strippers talk about this. Like, you can't actually strip without being really fucked up.
Totally.
Is there something similar, do you think, about that? I mean, this is very interesting because on one hand you're like, well, I hadn't expressed myself in so long, but then you're like, well, I didn't know how to do it unless I was really messed up on drugs or alcohol.
Yeah, I think because I had to mingle and I had to be this persona, and it was an act of more than anything. Doing drag was an act more than anything, and having to mingle and be around other people, I just didn't know how to do that. And I think more than anything, I was afraid. I was scared because doing drag, it always opened up an opportunity for men to kind of come onto me, and especially straight men, it allows men to kind of come onto me, and I just wouldn't know what to do in that capacity. But, I done drag, we'll get to this part, but when I picked up drag again, when I was 28, 29, when I started doing drag again here in London, but I'd done that sober. So I was able to do it sober, but the difference was I had boundaries. My sobriety allowed me to get onto a stage and perform, and then get off the stage and take off the eyelashes to leave as Calvin. Yeah. Where back in the day it was fueled with the alcohol because I just wanted to stay as that person because I just didn't want to come back to being Calvin.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of our podcast. We work very hard to maintain high quality content for the show.
To take an even deeper dive and support the show, join our listener community for access to exclusive content, practical tools, and resources supporting gender and identity exploration. We're so grateful to our sponsor, GenSpect, an international organization which offers an alternative to WPATH, providing a range of education, resources, and supports to anyone impacted by gender distress. GenSpect unites many different organizations globally and gives voice to thousands of previously untold stories. For more info, visit genspect.org.
And thank you to our sponsor, RHYME. Rethink Identity Medicine Ethics is a non-profit organisation dedicated to improving long-term care for gender-variant individuals. Visit rethinkime.org to learn more.
And now back to the conversation.
And
Yeah.
talking about that earlier on, I saw how kind of drink had been kind of almost sold to you as a kid as the way forward for happiness and fun, and you bought it, and it made me think you might be a little bit impressionable as a kid, and lots of us are. And then I thought, you know, if ever there was a culture bound syndrome, it feels like trans is at the moment, and it feels in other generations you would have been a gay man. Certainly a drag artist, but not necessarily trans. And it felt like it was in the water as such for you, that it was culturally there, just like drink was there, culturally trans was there, because it feels like a leap. When I heard about your life, I thought you were just, to me, the quintessential gay man, club scene. Yeah, you were, you know, you had a weakness around drink and drugs, or, you know, that was certainly an issue. But the leap over to trans feels very, very influenced by the era that you were living in. And I think, am I right in thinking you transitioned, you know what I mean? It feels like a leap that wouldn't have happened in 1994. And it happened in, if I'm right, 2014, where it was it around about then? When did you
2015, yeah.
Yeah.
How old
that it
were
was
you?
Just...
So I was 25, just turned.
So could you tell us that jump? Because you were a gay man who was a drag queen. You had it all going on. Like, you were metrosexual, and you looked like you were very comfortable with your femininity. And there's a funny story about you told your mother you just want boobs. Tell us all that.
It's really interesting that you said that, because being impressionable and being at a place where, you know, the show had flopped, we'd been sold this big promise that, you know, this was it. Life show. The MTV show had flopped. Like, life was going to be made for you. You guys didn't have to work anymore. Like, you know, this is it. You know, this is it. And it wasn't. So that for me was like a really low point in my life, because I thought this was my break. You know, this was my way into being fully accepted for who I was. And, you know, I began getting gifts from companies that, you know, were saying, would you like some Botox for free? You know, just kind of promote us, and, you know, it'll be good for your drag. It'll be good for your drag aesthetic. Okay. So I began kind of like dabbling in that world. And then, you know,
as a kind of a social media influencer, you were Yeah.
So as you know, as a blogger at this time, like being online, and, you know, I noticed that when because I was no longer working in the nightclubs anymore, because I believed that I was too good to work in the nightclubs. You know, I'd just kind of do these spots when I get booked to do this, or, you know, I'd just dress up in the house and I'd just show people, you know, what I looked like. And I noticed that people were interested in me more when I was dressed in feminine clothes. And, you know, I then began to kind of find myself in the world online of the trans community, and I began seeing, you know, how people were doing what they would do, and I began watching videos on YouTube of their feelings and emotions around things. I began hanging out with a lot of trans girls, and, you know, at the time, I was not working. I didn't have any money. I was living in my mum's house, and oh gosh, I'm gonna say it. Gosh, I began webcamming. You know, so that was something that I fell into. I was never sexual with people in person, and I think this whole kind of camera and this world of social media and the computer became a kind of a place away from me, and I began to create this identity based on what I was seeing through a computer screen. And what I noticed was, you know, a lot of the clients that I got as, you know, a webcam model, or whatever you want to call it, were straight men, you know, and they were paying me attention, and they were giving me money, and, you know, they wanted me. And then obviously watching these girls on YouTube and watching their stories, and, you know, I was at a place where I didn't fully know where I was, and I didn't fancy gay men. Like, I couldn't look at another gay man and go, I'm attracted to you. I feel attracted to you, because there was nothing attractive about a gay man. Like, I just couldn't. I couldn't. But straight men was the turn on for me, and it was, that's where I want to be with. But what I noticed is they wanted me for, a fun time and not a long time. And that for me I kept on tripping up at that place, because I think all I ever wanted was love and to be loved. Now, I'm glad that when it comes to the online webcam, and I have some sort of conscience, and I've been able to tap into that throughout my whole life, which is what my boundaries are and what my values are. And I remember sitting at home once and I was meditating, and it kind of came to me, which was, what am I putting my energy into? I'm allowing myself to be on a camera, strip for these guys who probably have a wife and kids at home. I don't know what their finances are. I could be taken from these kids, and I could be taken from a wife, and that for me just doesn't sit right, in order just to pay for hormones, And I stopped doing it. But it trickled, because my addictive personality became so focused on this transition that the drugs and the alcohol kind of subsided. Like, that wasn't really much of an issue at this point now, because my whole energy had gone into, how do I transition? And it was just every single aspect of my life was around trans situations and trans, just everything to do with trans, like whether it was activism, whether it was going into schools and universities, talking about it, posting about it constantly, kind of making myself out to be this victim that was hard done by, and that my life was hard. And, I became an echo chamber.
This kind of reinforces... Oh, sorry. Stella, you talk about this a lot, the way trans can become like an addiction. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, there was one piece in that, and it was fascinating, and I actually think trans women and webcams is a big thing that isn't talked about. I think it's a huge source of everything. I don't know, validation and vanity and sex and everything and money. I don't know, but everything seems to be there. I think it's a big story that hasn't been explored. So that's one thing that I thank you for bringing it up. But the second point was, I didn't hear when you jumped over, because you were gay, and there was a devastating, as far as I could see, loss, which is common for people who get a fixation upon trans. This kind of a big loss in their life happens, and they're flailing and they're looking for a solution. And you just didn't say that jump, that, you know what I mean, that you had a devastating loss. I could imagine you were going to be huge. MTV was going to be brilliant. In fairness, I'd say it was devastating. I really would. And I'd imagine, you were like kind of, the big event in Liverpool, probably, the dancer. I could just see what you were, and you're so beautiful. I could imagine that it was really hard not to be the huge success that you were. It sounds like you were really you could have been a great success. There's no doubt about it, with everything that you had going on. So I can see why there was a flailing. But do you remember how and why you jumped over to trans? Because it still does seem a jump to me.
It happened I'll be honest, it happened quite gradually, because of, it went from like the Botox, then it went from, the lip fillers, and then it went to the eyelashes, and it slowly happened, and then it went from, I really want to get extensions put in my hair, and then this sense of me becoming very feminine and feminizing myself as a man. Now, I remember having a conversation with Pete Burns back in the day over Twitter, and he was like, you remind me of myself. Pete Burns, you remind me of myself.
Could I just tell listeners, Pete Burns? Well, do you want to tell people who Pete Burns is? very yeah. Good.
He's the Scouser, you know. He's the guy that sings "You Spin Me Right Round," isn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
Dead or Alive.
Oh yeah, he's so cool.
He's vulgar. He was a vulgar man, but just such a great guy that just came out with it. And I loved it. He was like, you remind me of myself when I was a teenager, you know, I just didn't care. I'm a man and this is what I look like. And if you don't like it, then, you know, F off. And I was very much in that kind of place where it was like, I'm a man. I know exactly who I am. I wear wigs. I wear eyelashes. I wear makeup. And, you know, I even done this whole, you know, thing for the Tate with Andy Warhol exhibition, which was, you know, men wearing makeup, and, you know, this whole big activist thing of, you know, we should allow it to be more. And then like I mentioned, you know, I began to be around more trans women and trans girls and began to kind of fixate onto it online. So for me, it was I was spending a lot of my own time at home, like constantly on YouTube and constantly going through the feeds and watching other people and identifying with this sense of, you know, this is how I felt as a child. I felt very isolated, never felt a part of, blah, blah, you know, all of the tick boxes, I identified with that. And, you know, I spoke with a friend of mine and I said, this is, you know, I think I might be trans, and she laughed at me. You know, she was just like, I don't think, she was like, you know, I don't think you are. And I don't really want to mention her, but right now she's going through a whole, I don't know what she's going through, but her child has came out as trans and is now, you know, transitioning from female to male, and we're not really in contact as much anymore. But you know, she was like, I don't think you are, and I kind of went ahead, and it was just like, this is the idea, this is what I want, you know. It was.
And say how when you went to your mother, I love that story.
Yeah. No, I will get to that. But it was like, this is exactly what I want, and you know, I remember I was blogging at the time, and a lot of my life was shared with the world, and I'd put a camera in the bedroom, and I'd hid it. And, you know, you can go watch it on YouTube. And, you know, I sat my mum down and I gave her this letter. And, you know, my mum's dyslexic as they come. You know, she didn't read anything. She didn't really even, like, look at the paper. She just kind of like, you know, well, what is it? What are you showing me? And I said, I've been to see a doctor. And she was like, yeah. And, you know, well, what's the problem? I said, I want boobs. And her response was, well, what the fuck are boobs gonna do for you? You know, it was super plain and simple. What the fuck are boobs going to do for you? Because they're not going to make you happy. And it's really interesting because if you really listen to that video, as she goes down the stairs, it just switches, like as if nothing was ever said. And I say, what's for dinner? And she goes, fuck all, Cinderella. And she just carries on walking down the stairs, you know, and... It was like brushed under the carpet. We're not going to talk about it now.
There's something so Liverpool. What the fuck are boobs going to do for you? It just made me giggle all day yesterday. I suppose, I think another thing that isn't explored as much, and I kind of think you're touching on it, and Pete Burns is a very good example of it. Pete Burns, you know, he did that amazing single, and he was an amazing person. And then he fell into kind of extraordinary, extreme cosmetic surgery addiction, as far as I could see. And he died early, and it was very tragic. Mm-hmm. That's how I saw him. So if somebody said to me, I see you as a kid, if Pete Burns had said that to me, it would have given me the fear. Like, oh God, because he had so many cosmetic surgeries. He lost himself completely. Like he was unrecognisable. And I wonder, I believe that vanity and anxiety are very connected, and I think vanity can be a manifestation of anxiety, and I don't think it's spoken about enough. It's almost like it's taboo to talk about vanity, and I think it's just very often a manifestation of anxiety, and maybe we should speak about it a little bit more so that people could understand that you can drive really quite a lot of decisions that can be a distraction from yourself. And I wondered that for yourself.
Yeah, I think if, you know, I fixated on part of my body and that created anxiety, you know, I was able to as I began, going through my transition, I studied women's faces, and I noticed that, your faces are much rounder than mine. Like, why isn't mine like that? So then it created this sense of, there's something wrong with me. Why is your nose like this and my nose isn't like that? And, and I think it became this self-obsession. It is a self-obsession when you're so stuck in self that you begin to think that there's something wrong with you, that you then need to change it. And I posted about this actually yesterday on Instagram, and I think, for people that are listening and that may not be trans or have never, dealt with gender dysphoria, I think listen to the similarities and not the differences, because, we, not even just trans people, but, you see everyone now and everyone's getting the lips pumped, and, a lot of people are getting these cheek fillers and constantly changing themselves. And it's like, we're all doing it on a collective, we're all in this place where we all believe that, not all, okay, not everyone, but, a lot of people are believing that there is something wrong with us. And, I think it's really interesting that when I sit back and actually watch the world around me and see how much we've really normalized anxieties, depression, and, these, how we choose to look at ourselves, and, this normalization of, well, if you think there's something wrong with it, then go change it and get your lips plumped, or go get the boobs put in, or go get the gender reassignment. And it's this, like, we'll fix it for you. But there's a lot of other stuff that's going on in the mind that needs to be addressed first.
Right. And it's interesting because it's like at the same time that we're hearing much more about like beauty standards and, healthy at every size and, all of this like attempt to flatten what beauty is. I find myself really in conflict here because it's like, on one hand, the pursuit of the beautiful is something that is really ancient and old. And yet you're totally right, Stella, in that vanity can mix in with all of this, like, medical technology. And, like, where does the line get drawn? Because I think people crave the pursuit of beautiful things for the sake of beauty. But, like, how that gets manifested is really interesting. I mean, I don't know where to go with that. It's such a weird time, when we're trying to say, well, beauty's in the eye of the beholder and there's no such thing as actual beauty. And on the other hand, everyone's going to extreme cosmetic lengths to build this weird ideal of like really what looks like extreme cosmetic interventions. It's weird.
And for yourself, Calvin, it sounds like, the odyssey to Thailand was very interesting, where you were just chasing, as if you were one day going to reach this Zen place where you could just be. And it was like this incredible kind of pressure I felt, that you were trying so hard to be a kind of a pure soul, a beautiful soul, a kind of a good person who would just kind of maybe meditate and maybe yoga and eat pure food and be a good presence. And then maybe, like I said earlier, like 6 o'clock rolled around and you got a taste of a beer and went, oh, and this party animal came out. And that kind of Jekyll and Hyde, it was like the picture of Dorian Gray, it reminded me of, like, this party animal came out at night, and then back in the morning, the Zen, the meditation, purity will come back in. And it reminds me of almost, from the Catholic upbringing, like that would be very, Irish Catholic, you're there praying away, and then at night, like, where's the whiskey? The next day praying. And it's the same thing. It's just a new cultural invention of it. And for yourself, you were chasing that purity as if there had been sold to you this idea that there's a Zen place that we humans can reach, which is quite relaxed and quite at ease with themselves. And honestly, angst is the human condition. There's an awful, like, we wake up and we worry about this, we worry about that, and our brains are going, and it was like you had almost been sold that there is this person who can be relaxed, and you wanted that person. Desperately wanted him.
Do you know what I think really, I think it's important, like, so when I was 10, right, I flew to California by myself to stay with my auntie, and this was my grandmother's sister, and, she was sober, she'd been sober, 20 odd years when I'd got there when I was 10, Now, this kid coming from the streets of Liverpool, going to, you know, the wine valleys in California with this 70-year-old hippie and all of her hippie friends, you know, she taught me meditation when I was 10, and, you know, she allowed me to connect into spirituality. And it was really interesting because now when we look back, you know, she spoke to me in the language of recovery back then, and she taught me a lot of things. And I remember tapping into something where she allowed me to really tap into me as a person, and she showed me what love was. You know, she showed me what it was to be loved as a child, and to be held as a child, and to know what boundaries were. And then the people around me, you know, I noticed that these families, they loved their children and they cared for their children, and, you know, they fed them good food, and, you know, they looked after them, and they took them places. And when I remember coming back home, I was there for 6 weeks, and I remember coming back home to the airport, and I had like this little fake earring in that my auntie put in my ear, and, you know, I was so excited to get home and show my mum. And, you know, my mum turned up at the airport with my stepdad in the back of the seat, and she was hungover and she was vomiting, and, you know, that's what I turned up back to. And I think I'd always chased that. I think that was always the thing, which was because I'd been shown a different way of life. You know, I was taught that this is the way we live in Liverpool. We work hard and we party hard, and, you know, we don't talk about feelings. We put it all under the carpet. We've got no time for that. This is what we do. And I was then shown this other part of life, which was this gentle, this kind of more calm, and this way of being. And, you know, whenever I've been back and forth to California, you know, 8 times, and I have always been chasing that moment, and I've always been chasing like that sense of serenity that I had when I was there, and that sense of peace. But I think as I've got older, and I've gone back there when I'm older, and, you know, it's never actually materialized of, you know, what it played out to be in my mind. You kind of get to notice that, you know, my auntie's just as crazy as me, but she just meditates, you know. Yeah.
It's an amazing story, and I'm so grateful that you've shared some of it with us. Identity formation and understanding oneself is a long journey. And I mean, you started transitioning at 25. At what age did you detransition, just to give us a timeline?
27 was when I began detransitioning.
Okay. So, I mean, this also touches on this idea that people have, which is like, if somebody is over 18, then they know exactly what they're doing. And they've obviously got the maturity to know exactly what transition means. And your story, like Richie's, like many others, is a demonstration that, you know, being at war with ourselves can happen at any age. And it's really important for people to remember.
Especially in our 20s, where we, as you said, we go nutso, we go whoa, we go everywhere, we flail during our 20s, and most people do.
Yeah, you know, your 20s is a place to experience and to allow yourself to be in the mess. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's the thing that I've learned, which is to allow yourself to be so fluid with your 20s, make the mistakes, figure out who you are. You know, and we're always on this journey of figuring out who we are. And, you know, I think what happens now is that we have become so attached to labels that then create us as this is how we should be. You know, I ate vegan for 8 years, and I never call myself a vegan because, you know, that what I eat does not make me I'm not an identity of the things that I eat, you know. And I think that's super important, because once we start doing that, we block ourselves off, you know, of so many other things in our lives. And I think when I took on that label of I am now trans, it stopped me from doing so many things in my life, and it made me be a person that everyone outside is against me. You know, it made me become this person where I had to learn how to put on an armor. I had to learn how to, you know, suit myself up before I go out into the big wild world, because it's dangerous, and this can happen to me and that can happen to me. And I spent so much time and energy worrying about that. And, you know, I'd come home and I'd get into bed, and, you know, I'd take off my bra, which, you know, I didn't have boobs, so I don't know why I was wearing a bra, but that's another story. But, you know, I'd get into bed and I would lie there and I go, "Oof, I'm tired," and I go, "Why am I tired?" I'm like, "Because I'm tired of just constantly feeling like I'm having to fight and fight and fight." And the moment I detransitioned, life just felt very calm. The world around me became such a nicer place. I didn't see myself as this victim anymore. I didn't see myself as the whole world was against me. I was able to really tap into me. I was able to tap into, not this sense of having boobs are going to make me happy, or having, the lips are going to make me happy. I had to really figure that out on the inside, and to really reel that back in, because, people can agree with this or not, but, I just don't think in as a whole, the medical industry is never fully going to cure everyone. And I think when we're teaching people that, if you feel this way, that the medical industry is going to cure you and is going to help you feel better. And I had to go as far back, when people talk about, trans people have always been here, we've always been here, we've been here for thousands of years. Yeah, they've always been here for thousands of years, but they were not mutilating their body, and they weren't changing their body. They loved their body. They were able to be in that body and be in that sense of who they were. But we've now gotten to a place where we're pushing this thing of, well, if you feel this way, then we've got this cure for you, and you can change your body, and you can, miraculously be the person that you've always wanted to be. And I fell into that kind of trap and believed that was the way to be, and that just wasn't the journey for me.
And have you anything you would say to people who are maybe in that place, that maybe they're trans identified, but they're finding that it's not solving what they thought it would solve? And is there anything you would say to them?
I'm working with someone at the moment that's at that place, and the thing that I've always said to them, which is to shut the laptop down and kind of close your ears a little bit and figure out what's going on for you.
Wow.
Now, I think when we put a group of people together, we will sometimes notice that there's a track history of, an absent father, or maybe a bit of abuse that has happened to them, by a male or by a female, or, because for me, it was the sense of, the masculine is dangerous. The masculine is going to hurt me. It's hurt me before. It always has, and it always will. So that's in my mind, which is the masculine is dangerous. So I had to learn to become comfortable with that, and to, really rewire my whole brain as to what I believed was going to get me. We live in this world where toxic masculinity is going to kill you, and men are dangerous, and men are bad, and, we're just pushing this constantly. And so the advice that I give to anyone, which is, you have to go in and stop trying to heal yourself through social media. You stop using your, what's on your mind, what Facebook says, as actually what's on your mind. Speak to people, speak to professionals, and be honest. I think that's the main important thing, is be honest, because I had a tick list of everything that I knew what to say when I went to see a gender specialist, because I was taught all of this by trans women online, and they're going to ask you this question, this is what you answer, and you go in there already with a script, and you say what you're going to say, because you already have in your mind what you want. And I wasn't fully being honest with myself, and also with the doctors and the professionals.
That's really good advice, because so many people feel like they are going in with a goal. I know we'll have to wrap it here, but Stella, do you have another thought?
Just one last thing. You had a therapist. Sorry. You had a therapist, and the therapist said that they were basically felt that they were bound by law not to ask you.
Oh yeah.
And yeah. Have you anything to say to therapists who are thinking like that? Because you really could have done with people exploring. You were very hurt by the whole, it sounds to me, the whole trans experience. It sounded harrowing for you.
Yeah. And I'm still working through it. And I think, it was an NHS counsellor that I spoke to at the time, and he was afraid to say, you know, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, is there any reason behind that? And I think, you know, for people who go to university and want to be therapists and actually genuinely want to help people, you have to remember your intention of why you became a medical professional or a therapist in the first place is because you wanted to help people. And I think sometimes by helping people, you've just kind of got to stand up and speak up and say actually what is true rather than what you think is right just because you're being told what is right. So I think, you know, break the rules, say what you need to say, and actually help people. You know, I think that's the main thing, which is help people, because there are people out there that, you know, that are trans and they need this actual help, and, you know, they're being pushed aside because, you know, people like myself at the time are taking that space, you know.
Well, Calvin, we're going to keep you for a few more moments for a listener exclusive talking about kind of dinner table conversations, but we will leave it here for now. And we're so grateful for you telling your story. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, A Wider Lens. Listener support means a lot to us. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes and leave a review.
For more information, visit widerlenspod.com. There you'll learn about joining our listener community, how to contribute to our show, and where to find us on social media.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.